afternoon, everybody. My name is Ray Leach, and I'm the CEO of JumpStart, and we're greatly appreciative of everybody being here today. And I know folks are going to kind of come in and out, so I'm sure the room will fill up here in a minute. So I wanted to give a brief introduction to this session. We're super excited and encouraged to have this topic because it's so real in terms of capital now coming off the coast into the heartland of the company. So as many of you know, investing traditionally has been a regional industry. And particularly in Silicon Valley, there's all sorts of anecdotes and stories about VCs who not only won't invest in companies in LA, but won't invest in companies that they can at least ride their bike to. So Sequoia Capital has all these anecdotes about that, and that is certainly changing. One of the things that's also interesting, and I've been involved in this in the last 10, 12 years, is you have lots and lots of VCs over the last 10, 15 years who've gone global, but didn't necessarily in the early aughts look at the Midwest as much as they are today. So it's a fascinating kind of evolution of how the tech industry is changing. So for all sorts of reasons, Silicon Valley investors are becoming increasingly comfortable. Certainly an exit like Cover My Meds doesn't hurt. You know, there's nothing that speaks to VCs like cash on cash and exits, meaningful exits. In fact, this morning, who knew? We had another exciting exit here in Cleveland. A company called MacroPoint, based in Independence, got acquired for $110 million. This is a small little startup that's been involved in the transportation logistics business. It's been around for about 5 years. So here's another exit. So across Ohio, we're seeing exits, $100 million plus dollar exits from startups in Ohio pretty much once a month, once a quarter. At least once a quarter, and you couldn't say that 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So again, nothing speaks to VCs more than cash. So with that said, I'm very, very excited to introduce John Locke. John is a partner with Accel in Palo Alto. And another neat thing is he grew up in Ashland, Ohio, so 70 miles down the road. And for anyone who is a close student or fan or entrepreneur connected to the venture capital industry, Accel needs no introduction. They are considered one of the top handful of venture firms that have been around for multiple decades, one of the top performing and one of the largest venture firms in the country. So with that, I'm going to pass this panel over to John. He's going to introduce the other folks here with us. Very, very successful entrepreneurs from other parts of Ohio who've raised significant venture capital from the coast. So with that, John.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. So we were talking about this just a second ago backstage, but and I'll introduce these guys in a second. But between the two of them, Andy, who founded Everything But the House in Cincinnati, and then Dan, who started Braintree in Chicago, and then most recently Root Insurance. They've, between their three companies, hired more than 1,500 people in the Midwest and over 1,000 people in Ohio in the last 5 years, which I think is pretty awesome. Why don't you guys give your quick backgrounds, where you grew up, and we'll start there. Sure. We're going to spend most of the panel talking about raising money, both from Midwest venture funds and what that climate looks like, and then also from coastal funds. And then we're going to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions from everybody. So please ask away when we get to that point. Perfect. Andy, why don't you start where you grew up? You grew up in Cincinnati, and then maybe talk about when you first got interested in entrepreneurship.
Sure. So yeah, Cincinnati, born and raised. Grew up there, the son of a third-generation family business owner. So my dad was in not the sexiest of startups, but he was in a third-generation commercial printing company. And we grew up, my brother, myself, and my sister, grew up in and around family business. And we grew up going to the fulfillment center, the print shop. They were printing for P&G, Eli Lilly at the time. And so we'd go down and we'd see what was going on and kind of learn business through him and through his lens. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be involved in business, whatever that meant at the time. So didn't have a specific industry in mind, but just knew at the end of the day that I was either going to probably join the squad at the printing company, or that we'd spin out and do something ourselves. And so fast forward, kind of in and around family business growing up, went to school here in Ohio at Miami University, and then back at grad school in Cincinnati at Xavier. And in that time, kind of post Miami, started a real estate development company with my brother and my dad and three other gentlemen. and realized about 18 months into trying to get one project off the ground that real estate was not where we wanted to spend our career. And we were just pulling our hair out trying to get one thing off the ground. And from 2006 to 2008,
that's great timing to be in real estate.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible. Timing's everything. And so we slogged our way through like a $20 million development in a suburb of Cincinnati. And like I said, realized that real estate wasn't where we wanted to move fast because we couldn't. So we set our sights on finding a little business that was in a big industry that was ripe for consolidation, either through a roll-up or building a brand ourselves. And we had an acquisition profile together and started looking near and far. And we discovered this little old website in Cincinnati called Everything But the House, or ebth.com. And we literally, our CFO at the time walked in one day and he said, "You guys have to check out this website. It looked like the most ghetto website I've ever seen. I mean, it was old school. It was like an online Excel spreadsheet. But they were selling the contents of estates all online. So they were sending in a team in Cincinnati to photograph, inventory, and create this digital catalog of the contents of homes, and they were running an online auction. And what we had noticed is that over the course of the month or two that we were following them, the number of estate events that they were hosting every month, the auctions, were growing pretty dramatically. And so this little business met the acquisition profile that we had put together. It was in an old school arena that hadn't yet utilized technology to innovate or consolidate the industry, and it was ripe for a consumer brand. At the time, it was mostly being sold, the contents of these homes was mostly being sold to kind of a wholesaler, somebody that was kind of still playing middleman, so that they were buying and then reselling. And we said, okay, if we can get this inventory through technology and reach to a global retail-like audience, thus driving higher values, there's probably some money in there of which we can take.
Yep.
And so we cold called the two founders in Cincinnati, two of the best people I've ever met, and they're still involved in the day-to-day at Everything But the House today. But we pitched them on the idea that we had to help kind of take this little gem of a business and scale it. And fast forward 5 years now, and I've been there since May of 2012. So
cool.
That's full story.
You got 1,000 people.
We got a lot of people. A lot of people.
Cool.
Very human capital intensive business, but I wanted that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to lead, motivate, mentor, and create something special through human capital.
Yeah. Did you ever think about moving to any of the coasts or moving to Silicon Valley after school? Because there's probably a number of people here know this, but there's a good Miami of Ohio contingent at a couple of the top tech companies in the Bay Area, Uber most especially.
Absolutely.
Ryan Graves, the original Uber CEO, is a Miami of Ohio guy.
Yes.
Although I guess he's not there anymore.
Correct.
Which is a whole different panel.
Yes.
Did you ever get pulled, or were you always wanted to be in Cincinnati?
Yeah, so I knew that, post-college I'd probably end up in the Midwest. A lot of Miami folks end up at Chicago. So Chicago was on the short list, but then ended up starting this business out of college here in Cincinnati. And but we had, you mentioned the Uber guys. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of the Uber folks.
Yeah.
And I was in a fraternity. We probably have 10 or 15 guys from my fraternity that graduated the same class that are at Uber.
Yep.
One started as a general manager of Chicago. He spun out, now he's running Asian operations for them. Ryan Graves. A few folks. And so what we'd seen them do, so no, I didn't want to move there, but what we'd seen is ripe for consolidation, big business that had not yet had a branded player in it in transportation.
Yep.
So we definitely learned, and kind of through the lens of Uber said, okay, let's see what we can learn here, and the positive takeaways that we could kind of take and apply to a business like ours.
Cool. Dan, your background, maybe start with where you grew up.
Sure, yeah, also from Ohio. I grew up in Mansfield, about halfway between here and Columbus, not too far from where John was at in Ashland. And I moved to Columbus, went to school there, and graduated from college in 2006. And at the time, I got an internship with JP Chase. And after that internship, I stayed on full time, finished up college, nights, weekends, and online so that I could start working right away. And I thought working for JP Chase was going to be the greatest job ever. Here was this great financial corporation. Clearly, they know how to run businesses. Like, I was going to learn a lot there. And it really turned out to not be the case. I was there not too long after Bank One and Chase merged.
Yep.
So there were constant reorgs. It was very chaotic inside the organization. And the pace was also lethargic. It was very hard to come in as somebody who was eager and wanted to make really good contributions to what was happening and actually get things done despite wanting to try really hard. And after a couple years with JP Chase, I worked for a small consulting company called ThoughtWorks.
And that was in Columbus, or that was in Chicago?
I still lived in Columbus. The company was located in Chicago, and I worked on a project in Atlanta. We traveled.
Makes sense.
I know, exactly, right? Everybody there pretty much traveled for work, which is how I ended up on a project in Atlanta. And that was fantastic. I learned a ton, especially ThoughtWorks did a really great job of facilitating collaboration between all the different client projects they had going on. And while somebody straight out of college can't really go and change jobs every 6 months, within the umbrella of a consulting company, you can get pretty great exposure to a lot of different industries, a lot of different companies in a relatively short period of time. But the travel does wear on you. Getting on an airplane every Sunday night, back home every Thursday night, living out of a hotel. And that's actually how I ended up going to Chicago. I was traveling when my wife graduated from college. She got a job as an actuary with Allstate in Chicago, and we went there in 2008. I was fortunate shortly after that to connect with Brian Johnson, who was starting Braintree at that time. And Braintree is an online payments company, processes payments for businesses that want to accept credit card payments online or in their mobile app. At the time I joined, the company really had modest ambitions to build pretty great products around payments, provide really great service, try to take some of the practices in the payments industry where a lot of providers were hiding fees. It was hard for businesses to understand what they were paying. The tools for developers to integrate were really horrible, and we wanted to make that all better. So I joined the company as
And this is, by the way, for anybody that follows the payment processing sector, this is pre-Square, pre-Stripe.
Oh, yeah.
So this was not as obvious of a venture category as it is these days.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing about that is at that point in time, people thought payments was pretty much commoditized.
Right.
And that providers were mostly competing with each other to reduce margins on fees, but there wasn't a lot of innovation in the space. And interestingly, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I think there are a lot of parallels now with what we're doing at Root.
Yep.
I joined Braintree as its founding CTO. We had about 5 people at the time, and it grew way beyond what we ever expected. We were fortunate to acquire some of the fastest growing and most discerning companies as clients. Braintree does a credit card processing for Uber, Airbnb, GitHub, a lot of really great businesses. And now Braintree processes 1 billion credit card transactions every quarter, which is a lot of payments volume.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was there for about 5 years, and then my wife and I had a baby, decided we wanted to come back to Ohio and be closer to family. We came back in 2013, worked on a few different ideas, and then got connected with the team that was starting Root. And I think very similarly to how I just described the payments industry in 2008, where it kind of felt like maybe it was commoditized and there wasn't a lot of room for innovation, but very clearly now there turned out to be a tremendous opportunity there. Met with a group of people who felt like car insurance was very much in a similar place. You look at these giant car insurance companies now, and most of them are competing over who can have the most gimmicky marketing, right? Like what kind of talking animal can you put on TV to try to get people to come buy insurance from you? And we actually think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. We really believe that the price that people pay for car insurance should be based on how they drive and not only based on their demographics like it has been traditionally. So a couple of years ago, I started a company to do exactly that, to start a car insurance carrier that actually built really great products for people, a product that affects pretty much every single person in this country. Car insurance is compulsory. You legally have to have car insurance if you want to be able to drive, and I think there are very few products that have that sort of reach. And we care passionately about trying to build a better product around it, build a better user experience around it, and then also apply data science to understand how people drive and ultimately reduce insurance premiums for good drivers significantly as a result. I started with Root 2 years ago. We're based down in Columbus, here in Ohio, and things have been going really well. I'm really glad to be back in Ohio.
Yeah, cool. I think the startup and investing scene in the last 3 or 4 years in Ohio has really evolved. I mean, this event, which has been fantastic, is really good evidence to that, and firms like JumpStart and Drive being here. When you guys got your businesses going, Andy, yours might have been a little bit different because you effectively acquired a business. Sure. But did you work with any local incubators or funds when you were getting it going? And then, Dan, I want to ask you the same question.
Yeah, so in Cincinnati, there are 3 primary players, not on the funding space side of things, but you call it accelerator or fund of funds or kind of an incubator or mentorship programs.
Yeah.
And so there's Cincy Tech, early stage, kind of seed investors, and they do some mentorship programs and whatnot. I probably butchered exactly what they do, but I think there are a few folks here to talk about that today. Centrifuge, they do 3 things. They have a fund of funds. They have kind of a co-working space where you can actually sign up as a member and join. And then they have a corporate connections program. And so I worked actually, when we were debating raising externally, I called a colleague of mine over at Centrifuge and said, hey, listen, this is what we're thinking about doing. we're a profitable business now in 4 or 5 locations, looking to expand, thinking about taking on external funding. And so we tapped in very quickly to the network that they were creating between Cincy Tech, Cinterfuse, and then Braintree is an accelerator in Cincinnati. And so the 3 of them, we came together and I started just meeting with anybody and everybody I could to just understand exactly how to kind of go about this, what's important to the external investment community, and if we're going to raise funds, how best to do that.
Yep.
So that's the extent. I think we also leveraged all of their corporate connections, their intros, and their networks more than anything else. And then we, because we're passionate about the region and the startup ecosystem, we tap in there to just get to know as many people as we can.
Yeah, but you didn't raise money from any local funds.
That's correct.
You used some kind of a debt instrument to fund the initial purchase, and then
correct.
we'll talk about how you raise growth rounds after that.
Yes.
Dan, you've done it 2 different ways. With Braintree, you guys never raised any money for the first
About
4 or
for
5
the
years,
first
and we're
3,
very proud about being bootstrapped and all of that. And then we ended up investing, I guess it was 4 years in, maybe 4 or 5 years in 2010. Talk about that decision to bootstrap, why you guys did it, and then I want to talk about if you would do it again. But I think that's a very interesting way to build a company. We don't see as many of that these days because I think in part due to these local venture incubator ecosystems, which are funding companies from earlier days. But you guys totally did it yourself and got to 10 or 15 million in revenue and profitability without any venture help.
Definitely, and I think for us, the approach worked really great, especially in that space. We were fortunate to acquire enough customers early on to really bootstrap the business and grow via revenues. I think the good thing about that is it put us in a position where we were really focused on having solid unit economics behind the business.
Yeah.
We were focused on understanding how we were making money, the payments volume that we processed, like what we needed to bring in order to continue to grow the team and scale the company. And I think having that mindset was really healthy for us as a business. You do reach a certain point where you maybe want to accelerate that growth a little bit faster than you can by continually growing your customer base. And at that point, venture capital made a lot of sense. I think depending on the business and the industry and the circumstances you're facing, sometimes you have to go straight to venture capital a little bit faster. With us starting Root, we raised venture capital from day one because you just can't really get an insurance carrier off the ground by bootstrapping it.
Yep.
You can't insure somebody and be able to pay their claims and everything without having a solid capital base. And you also can't build the foundational infrastructure that you need to run an insurance carrier before you can actually insure somebody. And that put us in a very different position. So I think to do it over again, it's really about understanding your business model that it almost feels like many startups miss. And I think it's an important aspect for us both in Braintree, where we did bootstrap, but also at Root, where we have venture capital, but we're still applying that mindset to our business. We're still looking at the policies we're selling, our customer acquisition cost, our loss ratio, which is based on the number of claims that we pay out and how much capital that is, and trying to understand the business with really solid financials and fundamentals behind it, as opposed to just raising a bunch of venture capital and then saying, well, now what?
Yeah, right. How much did you raise for the first round of Root?
Root was started with a $5 million investment from Drive Capital.
Yeah.
They're based in Columbus and focus on making investments in the Midwest because they believe that there is a tremendous opportunity here to build billion-dollar companies, and there's a lack of VC focus in the region.
Yeah. What was that process like? Did you guys think about raising an A from firms on the coast, or did you just go right to Drive because you're in Columbus and they're trying to work with as many Columbus entrepreneurs as possible?
We connected with Drive really early on. I think we were very fortunate to work with them, and it made a lot of sense to start Root here in Ohio. Like if you look, there aren't big insurance companies in California. I'm sure there are some, but if you look at the California Departments of Insurance regulations, you'll start to understand why.
I have no interest in ever looking at that.
And
I'll leave that to you.
It's regulated at state level. So while for a lot of companies, maybe it doesn't make too much sense where you start it, for insurance, it actually has a really big impact where you're domiciled and which state you're starting off in. Ohio made a ton of sense for us. We were very excited to connect with Drive and their focus here on the region. And we decided to partner up with them as opposed to trying to get capital from the coast.
Yeah. Is that a typical Drive Series A size, $5 million bucks? Is that what they're mostly doing?
I'm not sure exactly what their fund is. I know they now have about $500 million under management, so it's a very sizable fund.
Yeah.
That's probably about typical for what they're doing. Root was a little bit different because we were earlier stage than most of their investments. But again, you can't get a car insurance carrier off the ground without bringing on that capital early on.
Yeah. Yep. And then, Andy, you all purchased the business, ran it for how long before you decided that you wanted to raise a Series A?
So we bought majority interest in the business in 2012 in May. We then spent the next 12 months building. They were licensing a piece of technology at the time, an off-the-shelf piece of auction software. So we then built our own software for the next, call it 8 to 12 months. Launched that platform on March 4th of 2013. And then, this is a day I'll never forget, clearly. Like, hold your fingers,
Precise.
cross your fingers and hope it works. Yeah. And so then fast forward another, from March 13 to November 14. So another year and a half where we launched Northeast. We launched a location in Connecticut. We launched in a small town called Lexington, Kentucky, so that if we failed in Lexington, nobody would know about it. And we're still in Lexington. It's actually one of our largest cities still because we've been there the longest, outside of Cincinnati. And so we continue to bootstrap. So Dan has a similar story, at least to the Braintree side of things, that we got to about a $10+ million a year kind of run rate.
Yep.
Before
almost
taking on
identical to
venture.
Braintree when we invested. Yep.
Because in a business like ours, the unit economics of launching a city are the most important thing. So what's the capital outlay? How long does it take to return that capital? How do you accelerate supply and demand acquisition locally? And then we had some shipping and logistics infrastructure to build out. And when we launched Connecticut, we actually realized that we needed to kind of fix this whole shipping and logistics behind the scenes infrastructure because we were bringing a bunch of this inventory back to Cincinnati. And what we realized was in order to really accelerate growth, before we took on outside investor capital, we needed to show that this local by local mom and pop business could be transformed into kind of a global marketplace. And by doing that, by focusing on shipping, logistics of used inventory, used unpackaged inventory sitting in grandma's living room, we needed to be able to build that behind the scenes and show somebody that we knew where to place the money, how to get a return on the dollar, and then we decided to raise funds.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I think you'll see more venture firms like Accel investing in the Midwest long term is exactly what these guys say about unit economics from the beginning and strong return on investment and cash flow, which are like 3 phrases that you don't hear in San Francisco very often. So it's really refreshing to hear it. And I do think there's something to just that infuses into the DNA of needing to bootstrap a business and get customers and make sure the numbers work from the start. So it's interesting that you guys have had very parallel processes in that regard. You got 6 or 7 cities working, and then you went to Spark and Graycroft to raise a Series A. So you brought coastal firms in. What was that process like? Did you know that you wanted to go to those 2 firms, or did you meet a bunch of go down Sand Hill Road?
You want the real story?
I want the whole story.
All right. So the real story is we knew we had a very once we had identified that we were going to take external capital. And we wanted a firm, we had identified a short list of our top 5 that had been in similar businesses that understood the complexities of a business like ours. We wanted to bring on money that had invested in the consumer space specifically, and a firm that had had some big wins, such that you're not their first. They're not banking on you and only you to return the fund. And it just brings about a different level of pressure. And so what we did is we had this short list of people, and then we had another list. And that other list was like, hey, we can get warm intros to this list, but we don't really want their money. And so I didn't want to waste anybody's time, but that's effectively what we did. Is we said, let's get in the doors to this list of people and practice and understand what questions they ask, what's important to them. And what you realize is after about 2 or 3 of these meetings, they all ask the exact same questions.
We think we're really smart and have unique questions.
What's your growth? What's your growth? What's your churn? What's your CAC? What's your LTV? And you're like early stage. You're like first meeting you have. You're like I don't know any of that. But now I do. And
the secret is to ask them like you're the first one to come up with it.
Exactly. Like I've got a really in-depth question here. What's your growth rate?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you realize actually through that process, the benefit of that, not only did you understand what they were going to ask, but you also understood which investors asked the right questions. Because there were a ton of questions that, like if this investment or if this venture capital group had invested in SaaS companies only, the questions they were asking about our business that's nothing like a SaaS business were entirely out of left field. And so we knew we had found the right partners when they asked the right questions that were meaningful to a business like ours. How do you launch a city? How does your margin improve over time? Is the playbook defined? Great, tell me more about it. How do you acquire demand? How do you acquire supply? How do you ship product? And so very quickly we realized that we had baked our pitch, that we knew what questions were going to be asked, and we knew that we needed to find the right partners. And so then we very quickly, we got a warm introduction through Centrifuge, through a gentleman named Tim Schigel. And Tim introduced us to both Spark and Greycroft. And the other thing that you will hear that is very true is fear of missing out is a very, very important thing when you're raising capital. And fear is, you have to leverage it. And so what we did was we went to a few key groups at the same time. I happened to be in San Francisco for other meetings.
Of course.
To make them set a meeting.
Yeah.
And I got meetings with both kind of a handful of groups I really wanted to meet with. And at that point in time, kind of if you want to get into the actual pitch conversations, we can get there later because there have been some interesting ones. But walked out, after these couple pitch meetings, received 2 term sheets from the group, and that's that fear of missing out thing. Is you can then, we ended up playing both Spark and Greycroft. I don't want to say against each other, but we had 2 competing term sheets. Nice. And so at that point in time, I loved them both. They had both invested in similar businesses. We knew they could both be helpful, and ended up asking both of them if they'd be willing to split the deal. And they did at the end of the day.
How many for that first round, how many firms pushed you on being in Cincinnati versus relocating the...
Greycroft and Spark both pride themselves on going anywhere.
Yeah.
They had seen great wins outside of either coast and were excited of uncovering the next big thing. And I mean, they're going everywhere. The partner we work with at Spark, a guy named Alex Finkelstein, Alex has 3 or 4 deals, I think it is now, in Africa. So he's going everywhere. Yeah. And so that was important to us, that there was not going to be a ton of pressure. We've had it, certainly the question's been asked, but never a ton of pressure to move.
Yeah.
We had a very similar experience with wanting to try to find investors that understood our business model.
Yeah.
Everything, it's interesting for us at Root because almost everything we want to do as an insurance company is really hard because we're a startup and we're different than what a Department of Insurance typically sees coming across their desk in terms of how companies operate because they're used to working with multi-billion-dollar corporations. And everything that we want to do as a startup is really hard because we're an insurance company. And as an insurance company, we're heavily regulated, especially on the financial aspect of how our business is structured and how we manage capital. It's made it harder to raise venture capital. It's made it harder to raise debt, which we did early on as well. And finding investors who do understand that, you're an insurance company and you're not just a SaaS business has made a really big difference for us as well.
Yeah, it's key.
For any aspiring folks in the audience that are looking to raise their first round of capital, what would your guys' advice be, maybe to your younger selves looking back on the first capital raise from a coastal firm?
You want to take it first?
That's a good question. I think it's really dependent on the business and making sure that you understand that. There's so much great advice now about lean startups and customer validation, and know that when you go into the meeting. Know what you want to do, how you're going to do it. This is a venture capital cliche, and I'm sure you guys have heard it 1,000 times, but investors want to invest money, and the business should be have the right structures in place to get a return on that investment. It should be a machine that you put $1 in and you get $2 out, and you understand how to leverage capital in that way, versus something that you have no plan for, that you don't know how it's going to work, and it's some idea that you want to pursue. I think focusing on that, understanding that, knowing the industry, knowing how you're going to execute, that plan is going to change. You're going to be wrong about what you're going to do and how it's going to play out. There's going to be a ton of things that happen that you didn't expect, things that you thought would work, they're not going to work, and you're going to have to learn from that and make adjustments. But focusing on that early on will make those meetings go much smoother and I think open a lot of doors.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. So understanding, we meet with a lot of kind of aspiring or entrepreneurs that are trying to get an idea off the ground. And I'm not sure you'd be amazed, but I was amazed at how many folks you meet with that have a great idea, but the business model behind that idea doesn't exist yet. And it was shocking to me. And so, but I will tell you, I believe that being in the Midwest and specifically coming from what I'd consider more old school businesses in general with great foundational business principles that are profitable or EBITDA driven, that you're used to trading on a multiple of EBITDA, the foundation of just core business principles in the Midwest, I think actually help accelerate a lot of these companies downstream, because when they have their first meeting with an idea, They walk in and they understand the business plan, they understand the economics, they understand how they're going to make money, which ultimately is critical, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so I agree completely with that. I'd say the second thing, in addition to just knowing how you're going to run a business, it's going to change, it's going to shift, but how the business model works. Secondly, simplicity is key. We have a fairly complex business. I mean, not really in the fact that like we take photos of your stuff and we put it online, we sell it. Super simple, right? Did anybody not catch that? Because we take your stuff, we take a photo of it, and we sell it online. That's what we do. But the complexity is in the operations. It's in how do we market this service? How do you create a competitive advantage in this business? And understanding how to take that story and in a 12-page pitch deck, simplify it down to like the point where that you can flip to the first 3 pages and the investment community is like, I get it, I want to call because I see the opportunity, I see the business model, and I want to bet on this. That is critical. So understand your business and simplify it. Every business can be complex. But if you can simplify that into a few key slide deck pages, you're in great shape.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. I think it's very rare that I'll read past page 10 or 12 of a deck because I'm just too ADT to do it. So if you can't capture what you're trying to say in 10 slides, you're not doing it right. And so I think and we've almost started to push people more in the direction of just trying to write your market plan and your business plan with just in a single sheet of paper. Because sometimes with a slide deck, you can use a lot of pictures and graphs and almost of the story that aren't necessarily organic to you. But I think it's the crispness is the most important thing.
Yeah, and you get lost as an entrepreneur or when you're in the business day to day. What's important to you and how you tell the story is vastly different than how the external investment world sees your business.
Yep.
And we have 1,000 employees. What's in my head is not like it's not in their head necessarily. And so both from the investment community and the employee base, you have to understand how to take the thoughts and the processes and the strategy and actually get it down on paper. And one of the best pieces of advice I received from one of our venture partners was treat us like we are the dumbest people in the room. Every day of the week. They said, treat us like, because you look at so many deals, you have to understand and get to know businesses quickly, effectively, efficiently, and you want to be able to draw meaningful insights. And the only way you can do that as an investor is to understand what the business does, what's important to the business, and what the core kind of economic drivers are of that business very quickly and efficiently.
Yep. Cool. I want to spend a second just on your guys building your companies in Ohio post the fundraising stage. So Dan, what have been the biggest differences growing a company in Columbus versus Chicago with Braintree?
The biggest difference that I've noticed so far is really around recruiting and growing the teams. I think they're both great cities to build a company in. Columbus is definitely shifting now, and I think that shift has been dramatic over the past decade, even comparing back to my experience working for JPMorgan Chase, where back then, I wasn't graduating college with people that were talking about wanting to build startups and build companies. And now, like, Root is sponsoring a hackathon at Ohio State in a couple months. I think there's much more of a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship that just didn't exist before.
Agreed.
At the same time, sometimes to get the people that you really want to have to build your company around, you're looking for people who have experience in certain areas, and that can be tough. We have plenty of companies in Columbus that we can pull from if we need insurance experience. Nationwide is headquartered there. There's mid-tier players, a ton of them. It actually makes a lot of sense to start an insurance company in Columbus. But as we look for more on experience on engineering, on product, design, it becomes a little bit harder for us to find that. And in some cases, we can find really great people, and so far we've succeeded in doing that. I think one big advantage that you have with building a business in Columbus or in the Midwest is Root can become one of the most notable companies in Columbus, one of the best places for driven, talented people to go and work and make a giant impact.
Yep.
We're working again on a product that literally affects almost every person in this country. And I think that will allow us to assemble a really exceptional team, which makes a huge difference. Most people know that the people that you hire are going to have a huge impact on what you do, but I think even knowing that, people still underestimate it.
Yeah.
And we focused very hard on trying to assemble a really great team. You have a little bit less competition, but you also have fewer companies to pull from of people that have maybe been through it before in different contexts and different situations.
Yeah. Where are you getting most of your engineers?
So right now we've had a few that we've relocated to Columbus.
Okay.
And we've also found some of the best ones in Columbus so far, and we've worked very hard on identifying those people and getting them to come and join us. It's gotten us to where we're at today. We have about 35 people overall, But as we look to grow and we look to scale, it'll be a continuing focus for us.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think you'll have an office somewhere else long term, or do you think you'll always be in Columbus?
We'll see. I think an important part for a business, and I'd be curious how this works for you guys, is being close to your customers and understanding that. For us at Root, that works really well, being in the Midwest and starting here in Ohio, selling insurance to people here in Ohio. At Braintree, it was a little bit different. Braintree did open up an office in San Francisco, but many of our customers were high-growth tech companies, VC-backed, and they were located in Silicon Valley. And it was important for us there to have a presence close to our customer base. At Root, it's important as well, but I don't see us necessarily needing to go outside of Columbus to become like the preeminent insurance carrier of the modern era.
Yeah, great. How do you think about that, Andy? I mean, you guys have how many people? You have 400 of your people in Cincinnati?
Yeah, 400 or 500 there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, we benefit from the fact that a big component of our business is, as I've mentioned, kind of this back engine, this processing and the shipping and logistics of shipping used unpackaged goods at the click of a button across the country and across the world. And so we can find great distribution talent. Wayfair has a facility in Northern Kentucky. eBay Enterprise used to be in Northern Kentucky. eBay still has a facility there. Amazon is there. And we've got the Limited in Columbus and all of their brands. And so we can actually pull great e-commerce talent, great shipping and fulfillment talent from the Midwest. So we have a 250,000 square foot facility in northern Cincinnati, and we've been able to staff that up no problem because the talent is locally. So that's on the back end kind of fulfillment, and it's honestly a huge competitive advantage by being where we are.
Yep.
We couldn't have run that or launched that anywhere else to start, and so now we will take this model and we will replicate it elsewhere. But we've learned what we needed to learn here at a very low, let's say, low level of cost compared to doing it on the West Coast. Now we can take our learnings and leverage them elsewhere. From a tech talent perspective, we found great. We have a product, tech, and data science team of, call it 30 people now.
Yep.
We have 2 that work remotely. The rest are in Cincinnati, and we've been able to find tech talent from some of the leading, call it big brands, or the Proctors of the world, the GEs, the Fifth Third Bank. We pull from some of the old school providers where they've got a great engineering background that they need to then apply to something that's, I'd say, in a bit sexier of arena and helping build a consumer brand. Now, we have the 2 remote folks because we know that past a certain point, we will have to recruit engineers from outside the region. And so we're starting to build this, and our CTOs help to do this, but devise a strategy to basically figure out how to work remotely, quickly, efficiently, such that when we need to open up that pipeline, we're ready for it, and it doesn't become super disruptive.
Yeah.
Nowadays, with Slack, with video chat, with we Zoom to keep everybody in, and we have 1,000 people scattered across the United States, so we've had to become very efficient and good at managing remotely, and we've proven that yes, we have a bulk of the people in the Midwest, but we're not afraid of talent elsewhere.
Yeah, cool. I've got a few more questions, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So maybe I'll turn it over to you all, and if anyone has questions for these guys, please raise your hand or come up to the front. The question, just so everybody heard it, which is a very good one, is differences between Silicon Valley money and Midwest money.
Yeah. I'd say, and I'm going to generalize here because it probably has come a long way in the last couple of years, but when we initially raised in 2014, and we would talk to people, the valuations were less friendly. The terms were less friendly. We've raised very clear, clean money from November 14 till now with very minimal protective provisions, very clear line of sight to kind of getting us all rooting on the same thing. And again, I'm generalizing, but 3 years ago now, we found that the money was there, but it was going to come with a much more of a conservative lens and less of I'm going to bet big and I'm going to bet with you, not really against you, so that those, your vision's aligned with theirs. Again, I'm generalizing, and hopefully it's come a long way.
What's the single biggest thing that you get out of having a Silicon Valley investor or 2 on your board?
Yeah, I'd say the strategic introductions and access to strategic partnerships outside of, Cincinnati is great, Columbus is great, Cleveland's great, I'm sure, because of the same. We can get introductions to anybody in that city very quickly, efficiently, effectively. What comes with the coastal money is the introductions to people outside of the walls of the Midwest. And that, for us, as it relates to partnering with the real estate community, that was instrumental. They got us to the 2 leading brokerage conglomerates in the United States very quick, with 2 phone calls, and that helps. It's very impactful.
Yeah. Same thing for you, Dan.
For us, we'll be able to focus on the Midwest for quite a while, but eventually we're going to need a lot of capital to really achieve what we want to accomplish with Root. The car insurance industry is insanely large, and if you broaden it to insurance as a whole, it's the largest industry in the world. Personal lines, car insurance, which is like what everybody here has, just personal auto insurance, is $200 billion alone, the size of the industry. And that's not $200 billion like some pretty fuzzy math on the back of a napkin where somebody tries to put their total addressable market slide together. It is factually $200 billion. And with the competitors that we have and the balance sheet they have and the growth rate that we want to try to achieve, we'll need a lot of capital. And at that point, we'll likely need to go outside of Ohio. But I hope over time, and I hope especially as companies like Everything But the House and Root continue to have traction here, that more investors will realize the opportunity here, and hopefully Accel will have a bigger focus here.
Yeah.
And eventually, we won't have to go to the coast.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think the other dynamic is, and I think this has changed in the 12 years or so that I've been doing investing, but is the great thing about, and Ohio is a good example of this now, is you have a number of investors at places like JumpStart or at Drive or some of the places that Andy mentioned that spend a good amount of time building tech companies on the West Coast. I mean, when I first started investing and looked around at who was investing out of Cleveland and Columbus, it was typically, and I'm not trying to throw anybody on their bus, but it's typically a local entrepreneur or local angel group that had always been in that given area. But now, when you look at the team at JumpStart as a really good example, you've got people that helped get Yahoo going and Yelp going, and you look at the Drive Capital guys, and they were very, very good investors at Sequoia and backed companies like LinkedIn from the early days. So the great thing here now is there's such a merging together of local money, but folks that have built important tech companies over time. And I think that's fantastic for the region.
Stage capital will also then subsequently sign a contract for the startup.
Okay. So question is, taking what we would call strategic money, so sort of big company, corporate money, especially if it's tied into a potential customer or already is a potential customer. Have you guys taken any strategic capital, or has it all been from investing firms?
We have not.
No, neither have we.
We've not. We've taken the opposite. Like there's been interest. We have not. Now it's later stage, so we haven't, because it just precludes other potential strategics from getting involved in the future, or may preclude your exit opportunities. Such a different strategic wants to acquire. But what's interesting is in Cincinnati, Centrifuge pulls on a lot of the corporations locally. And they've set up this fund of funds where a lot of the local corporations have set aside funds where they can then deploy that capital. So you get the strategic introductions, but you're not tied to one corporation specifically. It's actually through a fund. That probably doesn't help, but they're a group you should probably talk to if you're in Ohio.
Yeah, and I think this is just this is boilerplate advice, but I think the main thing, especially at the seed stage, if you're going to work with a strategic, is just making sure there aren't any terms associated with long-term capital raising and a potential exit that put you in a difficult position. ROFRs, that sort of thing. I don't think so at that stage. I actually, sorry, the question is we're talking about strategic corporate investors, and is there anything that hamstrings you if you have a corporate investor as in your seed? And I think there are varying views on this. I think the answer is no at that stage, especially if it's a customer and you're just getting up and running. I think it's very explainable. And if it's going to be capital that helps you hire and grow faster, then it's a good thing. I think when you start to look at an A round and larger growth financings down the road, then there's a whole host of questions, mostly related to what your long-term exit options are that make it potentially a little bit more difficult to do it, or I would advise in most cases against it. But I think at the seed early stage, it's a fine thing to do.
Can I provide some unsolicited advice?
Please.
So we found great call it options, and it gave us the amount of capital we needed to get to that traction point where you're actually producing. If you can find a very friendly angel investor, like friends, family, anybody that's willing to bet on you, and they've made their money, they're comfortable, they're willing to bet on you and help set you up for success. I know it's easier said than done, but if you can find that to get to a point of traction, not to down talk like the seed stage investors that are in the room, I'm all for you guys, but when you can't get a deal done with them, if you can find a friend, a family member, you name it, that can help get your early traction, that will make those conversations much easier.
And I think, too, if there's any way that you could get one specific key person from that company involved without necessarily having to get the company to invest, it just makes your life a lot easier. I mean, we did this at Braintree where Nigel Morris, who is one of the founders of Capital One, joined to provide her real payment and credit card processing expertise to the board. And he was fantastic to work with, but we didn't necessarily have to deal with Capital One and Capital One Ventures as a whole. No offense to Capital One, but so we got the expertise that we wanted and the connections that we wanted, but we didn't have anything on our backs from a corporate VC perspective down, as we thought about exiting the company or down the road.
Interested in that.
Yep. Yeah. Question is, for your VC pitch, where do you start? How do you kick it off to get interest?
Can I start? You want me to
Yeah,
chime in?
sure. I think it's good to have a really clear and simple description of what your product is, who your customer is, and how you're going to make money. It's amazing, and I'm sure everybody in the audience has seen it. You go to a company's website, and you're on it for a couple minutes, and you're scrolling through, and you still don't know what they do.
Yeah.
And like, you're reading their headline, their taglines, everything, and you get to the end, and it's like, I still don't get it. And oftentimes, you realize maybe sometimes the company doesn't get it either. Like, they're still trying to figure that out, like who their customer is. And I think if you have a well-formulated plan, you should be able to describe in pretty simple terms what you do, who you do it for, and why they want it.
Yeah. Our pitch deck for the last 3 rounds of capital started with, we turn this, it's a house full of contents, into this, and that's the same home empty. And then the next slide is using this, and it's a picture of a computer with stuff on it. And I'm telling you, we turn this into this, using this. It just show them. Like, whatever that visual is, to Dan's point, you go to some websites, you don't even get it. Like, just hit them in the face with it. We do this. This is how we do it. This is our customer. This is how we make money. And then it's just, all you've got to get to is that next meeting. You've got to get to a warm call. You've got to get to an in-person. And so just funnel this down to the most basic of basic.
I think the only thing I'd add, those are great points, is just if there's any way up front you could convey why you're uniquely set up to tackle whatever the business is or the challenge that it is, that's a huge plus. So why do you know something about the market or have some kind of insight that the broader world doesn't have? That we love. Even if it's just a first slide, it could be your team. It could be anything. But that tie can even mean more than just a market opportunity slide that happens to have some big, this is a $5 billion or $1 trillion or whatever market that's frankly pretty useless because everybody's deck has $20 billion markets in it. So I think if you can tell your personal story in the context of your overall business story, it's a really effective way to do it. Cool. Thanks for having us, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks for these guys for doing it.